So the topic today is a thorny one, and it's about the Torah talking to us about the suffering of the Jews in Egypt and Moses' response to a certain incident. As I'm going to show you, God speaks to Moses and says from a burning bush, and he's out as shepherd in Midian, and God says to Moses, I want you to go to Egypt to liberate the Jews, the Hebrews, who have been slaves for centuries, and you're going to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And Moses says, me? What? Find someone better equipped. I have a speech impediment. I'm looking to be right now just to be a quiet shepherd. And God says, you're the guy. Who do you think gives eloquence to people? Me. You're the guy. And you have a brother, Aaron, who is an eloquent speaker. He's going to be your spokesperson. Go back to Egypt, and you're going to see he's going to be coming out to meet you. And I'm going to be with you. God, the infinite God, the divine, speaks to him. Whatever you say, boss. He's going to Egypt. He goes to Pharaoh at the end of what we read yesterday. Okay, not the Torah portion we're getting into, but I'm going to get into that a little bit. At the end of what we spoke about, what we read yesterday, he goes to Pharaoh and he says, let my people go. God said, and Pharaoh says, I don't know what you're talking about. What God are you talking about? And who are you? Not only will I not let them go, I'm going to double down. Now I'm going to tighten the screws on the Jews, on the Hebrews. And the Torah, in what we read yesterday, tells us that Jews accosted Moses and Aaron, saying, what are you doing? You're making life miserable for us. Go back where you came from. Who asked you to start meddling with Pharaoh? And the Torah portion we read yesterday ends with Moses speaking very strong words to God. It says, from the time I started doing your bidding, and we're going to read this inside, you want to translate it right, and I looked at different translations how to do it, but you have made it worse for the Jews. If we're not talking about God, the words themselves could be, you dealt evilly with them. We don't believe in God being evil. But let's see, the harm got worse. And you didn't save them. Why did you send me? And then the last verse of yesterday was God says, now you're going to see. Hang on. You're going to see what happens. Now, in this course, over the weeks of this year, you've seen that what they're doing, and it's a beautiful thing, they're trying to help us understand the brilliance of a commentator, an 11th century commentator known as Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, and seeing how he sees the Torah. In the text that we have here, it's beautiful, but it's very, to my taste, it's probably a little more technical about understanding Rashi than what I think we're here for, which is to understand theological ideas. So I'm going to focus on the theological ideas. We'll get to Rashi too, but it's really about the theological ideas. The theological idea that we're touching on here, and that we're going to wade into to some extent, is God and suffering. But it's not only God and suffering, or God, we call it God and evil. In the world of theology, there's a topic we call theodicy. Theodicy is God and evil, the existence. How does there evil exist in a world of God? We're not doing that head on, but it's related, as I see it. It's God and suffering, and our response, a divinely sanctioned. What is the Torah response? What's my response supposed to be to suffering? Right? I just lost my mom. So suffering there. Or there's a distinction. What's my posture when I'm dealing with someone who lost their mom? It's not my personal suffering, it's someone else's suffering. And there's a difference. I want to take a look at it, and I'm going to expand this a little bit because it is an important topic. The Torah presents to us, let's say, Abraham. Abraham was a person of great faith. Abraham and Sarah, great faith. So much so that God has told Abraham, and the Torah tells us clearly, God told Abraham that you are going to miraculously have a son with Sarah. His son, you're going to give him the name Isaac. And he is going to be your connection with the future. He's going to have children and great generations. Your descendants will be like the sand on the seashore, like the stars of the sky. God told him that. God tells him at one point, when Isaac is not yet married, and God tells him, bring him up as an offering, which means that he's gonna die. Go kill your son. Aside from the personal anguish of this gift, his only child, now being taken from him, and the idea is, well, 1 second, you're God. You know the future. You promised me something. You said I'm gonna have grandchildren. He's not married yet. There's no grandchildren. Doesn't make it. It's a legitimate question. I'll do what you say, but can you explain? Doesn't say a word. Torah says he got up early in the morning. The next day, didn't even dawdle or have coffee and just, take his last moments with his child. And he went off to do God's bidding. A person of great faith and acceptance. But in the same section of the Torah reading, the same Saturday morning Torah reading that we read that piece, we read about God telling Abraham that God is going to destroy. God is going to destroy some cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and the metropolis, where people were terribly cruel, and they were living evilly. So in the world at the time, the civilized world at the time, Abraham is the epitome of kindness and empathy and compassion. These guys are living like a blight on humanity. So you'd think Abraham, even if he's not going to say, good, go for it, it's about time, kill him, at least say, okay, not that much of a loss. What does Abraham do? And the Torah is very explicit about it. Abraham starts to argue with strong words. Well, the judge of the entire earth not do justice? That's an accusation against God. So if I find 50 righteous people, will you let them go, let them live? Find me 50. 45, he starts the bargain. Finally, it says 10. God says, find me 10. Can't find 10, he gives up. But what does it tell us? That arguing with God, or questioning God, or wrestling with God has a place. But it has to come from a place of not questioning God's goodness, are God's ability, are God's omnipotence. It's coming from a place of saying, I know you're great. I know you're loving. I know you can do anything. And therefore, I'm saying, there's a person suffering here. Please, I think it's my Jewish responsibility to say, God, please reconsider. Help this person in pain. So when it came to his own pain, Abraham, the loss of his son, he didn't argue because he accepted. He had no right to accept the suffering of someone else. He had to stand up for someone else's suffering. That is a certain model of how we see the world. The idea, the Torah greats did not just roll over when God said that something is negative is going to happen. The leaders stood up to protect their flock. At the same time, there's a strong emphasis on the idea that those leaders, they had absolute acceptance and faith in God, that God is not doing evil, and that God knows what he's doing. But even though God knows what he's doing, it's our responsibility here on earth to say to God, let me tell you how I see it here. There's someone suffering. God, please help. Please change things. To bring that home a little bit, I brought up, it's not in the text, but it's something that I think be helpful to us to be able to read here. Actually, before I go here, I'm sorry. I'm going to bring you we're going to read together a piece of Talmud. This section of the Talmud talks about what Moses experienced when he went up Mount Sinai. And the Talmud tells us that he had visions about the future, visions about what would be with the Torah, visions about Torah greats in the future, of people who would develop the Torah and study the Torah. And one of the people Moses envisioned was a man named Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, more than 1,400 years or so after Moses. But he saw him. And Rabbi Akiva had grown up without Torah knowledge, without Torah education, only started at 40, but it became a great leader. And Moses is enamored with the beauty of this man's life, what he accomplished in not just taking his status quo and moving with it, because his status quo was nothing to do with Jewish education. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says he had resentment and anger and negativity towards Torah scholars. And now he became a Torah scholar. He became a great person. So as part of that piece of Talmud, we're told about Moses' vision. And if on the second line here, it says, you have shown me, God, this is Moses talking to God. You have shown me Rabbi Akiva's Torah. Now show me his reward. He says to God. God said to him, return to where you were. He's on the mountain. Go back to the space where you were able to have visions. Moses went back, and he saw that they were weighing Rabbi Akiva's flesh in a butcher shop, as Rabbi Akiva was tortured to death by the Romans. Rabbi Akiva was a great rabbi in very, very difficult times. And in times when the Romans were penalizing Torah study and even more Torah teaching with death. And the Emperor Hadrian had him tortured to death. And this is actually part of it's in our Yom Kippur liturgy at the end. after Yizkor, when it's a smaller crowd, there's a little piece there about it. It's in the Talmud. It wasn't just he died. They combed his flesh from him, and that's how he died. And Moses saying that what they did is they sold the flesh in a butcher shop. So Moses is on the mountain. The Jews are at the bottom of the mountain. He's getting the Torah. God saying, here's the beauty of Torah. Here's what the future is. Here are there going to be people committed and accomplished in Torah. And he sees Rabbi Akiva and says, wow, what a beautiful life. What a beautiful story. What's the reward he got? So God fast forwards, says he was tortured to death. And they're selling his flesh in a butcher shop. Moses said before God, Master of the universe, this is Torah and this is its reward? He didn't say, oh, you know what you're doing. He's saying, how's this going to work? This is terrible for marketing. What are we going to do? This is how? In the human condition, how can this be? God said to him, be silent. This is intention arose before me. So what did that mean? Be silent. This intention arose before me. But he didn't answer anything. He didn't say, don't worry about it. His soul is having tremendous. This is just a phase till the soul gets a great reward. It's somehow a cleansing for earlier sins. Nothing. He just says, silent. Accept it. Yeah.
The phrase, this intention arose before me, does that imply that there was somebody before God?
No. Before me, no. Oh, I'm sorry. Before me doesn't mean in a timeline. Before me means this is. It's like something is before me. This is the wish I have. So, and doesn't tell me anything. It tells us that this is what God wants. It's a will. And sometimes our desires are not expressed, are able to be expressed in logic. That story is instructive, and I brought it up for a couple of reasons. Because Moses accepted God. At this point, he's on Sinai. He's one with God. He's been speaking to God. He's been through the Egyptian story. He knows what it is. He doesn't doubt God for a second. But he's standing up for this future Akiva. He's saying, it didn't happen yet. Stop this. Don't let this happen. What? That doesn't make any sense. And God says to him, sometimes I don't make sense to you. And that is part of our faith. That I believe in God. I believe in God's goodness. I believe I see God's goodness. I believe I see God's blessings in my life. And I know that sometimes there's things I can't figure it out. And I understand there's some things I can't figure out. If it's someone else's pain, I'll say, God, I don't get you. I don't know your bookkeeping, but I'm asking you, please help this person. That's totally legit. Like Moses did. And sometimes the answer is, this is just the way it is. Yeah.
It's like something similar when you have family member very close to you
Yeah.
that died.
Yeah.
And somebody who never have experience that that you are going through.
Yeah.
And say, I am sorry for your loss. This person doesn't understand what your loss, because the only person who can understand is somebody who went through a similar kind of experience.
Yeah, so you're right. And we have to be very, very, very careful to think that we can understand or empathize, even if someone thinks they did go through the same thing, because it's very individualized. And that's one of the reasons that when it comes to a Shiva, Jewish law says, don't even say anything until the mourner talks to you. Because what you're doing is you're saying, I'm here for you. That's safe. Once you're out, you got to be careful. Leon, you're asking a question.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Just want to ask for clarification. I thought that there is a little bit or somewhat, maybe it's not related. That's why I'm asking for clarification of a component that a person in Judaism could ask for a change not only for the others but for themselves too until it happened and only after it happened accept it. In other words, like for example, Moses was asking God to allow him to go to Israel, or people in our times pray if they're ill so that they get better.
So you're absolutely right, Leon, and I'm glad you brought it up because I'm not saying, God forbid, that we shouldn't pray to God for ourselves. We have to pray to God for ourselves. Every 3 times a day, it's about looking to God and saying, I need this, and because I believe you hear me, and I believe you can, that's why I'm saying this. So us asking God for our own needs is an important expression of our trust and our faith in God. What I'm trying to show is a distinction, maybe a nuanced distinction, but a distinction between pushing back against God to the sense of saying that something like Abraham saying that, will the judge of the entire world not do justice? That he didn't say for himself. He prayed for himself. Here he didn't even say anything. But the idea of what we're going to call wrestling with God and respectfully accepting God, accepting God's love, accepting the fact that God can, and pushing back and say, I can't accept what's happening to this person. That's more, the Torah shows us that there's a distinction. That's more acceptable. Pushing back against God, not praying to God, but pushing back against God's decisions when it comes to someone else. So there's a little more acceptance of what it's doing. We're asking for God. If a person is praying to God to be healed, saying, God, you created me for a purpose. I want to fulfill that purpose. I want to be your agent on earth, and I can't continue if I'm ill. That is totally not only acceptable, it's important to do that. When someone else is suffering, it's a much more, it could be a much more adamant position to say, God, how can you allow the suffering? With the individual, the personal, it's not so much about the suffering, but the fact is that I can't be who you want me to be. But we don't have to get that far with someone else. We stand up to God for someone else's suffering. I believe that's how the Torah is presenting it to us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. So I thought that maybe there is some difference, slight difference in the Akeda because there was like a total acceptance and zero challenge. But I don't want to distract the class.
Yeah, there are definitely nuances in this, Leon. There's and even in what we're going to be talking about today, there are nuances in it. But so it's all very nuanced. But I'm trying to split the two as far as the energy that we see in the Torah and the language we see in the Torah. And they hear Moses talking about the Jews, to say that you've made things worse for them. And I'm saying again, we wouldn't translate it that we're talking about God, but if we use that phraseology, those very Hebrew words about someone else, we would translate it as you have dealt evilly with them. That's very strong. Moses would never say that about himself.
Okay.
But he's standing up for the Jews.
Thank you.
Good.
So how does this mesh with the idea that, through personal pain, you learn? So is it part of God's plan that sometimes we suffer because through suffering we change and we learn? Or
there's definitely I don't know if you hear online, Rhonda's asking something that I think is very important. Is there a doctrine that sometimes we grow through pain, and God presents us challenges and sometimes unpleasant challenges, because that's how we grow. And the answer is that's very much a Torah value. But I guess that's kind of, if let's say I'm going through a stress, in running Chabad.
You're going through a pain.
I'm going through a pain now.
You have a lot.
Right, but I want to. Okay. So even myself. Okay, so I have a friend, a close friend who recently lost his father. For me, the idea of looking at what I can do to grow from this, what I could do for my mother, how this will make me hopefully a better and more empathetic human friend and rabbi. Okay. 30 years ago, I spent a week in Cornell because the doctors were trying to find something. Me, I had a problem with my eyes. And I still, if I walk into a hospital, I see myself in that bed. I re-experience the vulnerability, the fear. I'm not glad that I had this eye problem, but I want to learn from it. Now, the same thing, this journey I'm going through with my mother. My father should live well with my father. For me to see that as saying, this is something, God, I have this soul journey, and I have these roadblocks or impediments or curves or whatever it is. And that's just the way it is. And it's about one step at a time and learning from it and growing from it. That's for me. My friend who just lost his father, meet him, all I give him is a hug. I'm not sermonizing to him. It's like what someone just said, what Dr. Carlos just said. I'm not going to say grow from this. It's barbaric. It's not for me to tell him. If he opens up the conversation, that's one thing. I feel so sorry, because for him it was more sudden, and it's just to try to be there for him. So those lessons, which are there, and maybe that's a very good distinction in regard to Leon's question. I'm a rabbi, and people will ask me sometimes, why did this happen? For me, to tell someone who just lost a loved one, to share something, say we grow the pain, is the most unfeeling, unempathetic, barbaric thing I could do. I'm going to tell them that there's a reason for their suffering. That's called justifying it. All I can do is hug them, especially if I never went through what they went through. For myself, I can say, okay, God, I'm yours. This is what you served up. I'm going to try and figure this out. And even if I don't understand it, I'm going to try and see how I'm going to deal with this so I can get to the other side. Not just surviving, but somehow growing. That calculus is really very, very, it's personal, and you only shared with someone else going through trouble, and very, very careful. Many, many years ago, you bring to mind, there's someone, a former priest, he's not Jewish, but we used to study together often. Some of you may remember him. He's still alive, thank God. But one Saturday afternoon, he knocked on my door. It was a snowy time. It was this time of year. And I was sitting by my Shabbos table with a few people. You don't get many people just knocking on my door in Basking Ridge. You don't even have sidewalks. And he called to tell me he was coming from the hospital, from his doctor. He hadn't gone home yet. He'd just been diagnosed with colon cancer. You know what I did? I hugged him. I said, I'm here for you. I'm so sorry. I'm here for you. We're going to beat this. That's all I can say. Because we used to study together Hasidic philosophy, over time he started to ask me, about more mystical underpinnings of his journey. If he's asking me for it, I want to help him. He was taking comfort in it. Framing it that way was good for him. So of course I was following his lead. As a matter of fact, at our dinner that year, it was the second year, our second dinner, he stood up and he spoke about how Hasidic thought had helped him through his cancer journey. But why did I share it with him? Because he opened that door and invited me in. For me to stand out on my outside my front door and him tell me about his diagnosis and then say, let me give you a lesson of what's going on, that would be heartless. I give him the love, give him the support, don't explain anything until he wants it. And then you see how much we can get, because the truth is, what can I explain? I don't know why God gave him that, or whether God gave him that, how it all worked, but I can help him understand more of the mystical underpinnings, and if he said it helped him, I'm happy. And I can understand it helping. Okay. I want to move this along a little bit. And I want to go, but on this topic, and I think it's an important one. No, actually, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. I'm going to take it to another. There's a in today's lesson, something, the book, they quote an article, a snippet of an article from a classmate of mine. This classmate is a little younger than me, and I'm going to say, unfortunately, of blessed memory. He passed away from cancer. He was a brilliant young man, and he was teaching students in Toronto. He passed away 2-3 years ago. And he wrote an article about, I don't think he was sick yet, but he wrote an article about this, dealing with the acceptance of things we don't understand. They bring in a snippet. I wrote up the larger piece because I think it's helpful to us in understanding. Let me just move this out of the way. Okay. I'm going to read through this with you pretty quickly. His name is Rabbi Akiva Wagner, blessed memory. And he writes here, the following story is related in the Talmud. There was a man named Rabbi Nechunya Chifr Sichin, the well digger. He was a sage with a very unique occupation. During the festivals, when hordes of Jews from all over would arrive in Jerusalem for their pilgrimage to the Holy Temple, he concerned himself with their physical needs. Such crowds automatically meant that great supplies of food and drink were required, and Rabbi Nechunya, on a volunteer basis, dug numerous wells and pits so that the water supply should be in abundance. Okay, so here's someone who was doing a mitzvah for the populace in bringing water. Once, a terrible tragedy took place, the Talmud tells us. Rabbi Nechunya's daughter fell into a pit. The news spread quickly, throwing everyone into despair, and the chance of her being quickly rescued was minimal, and because one couldn't survive in the bottom of a well for more than 3 hours. Filled with concern, everyone turned to God in prayer, beseeching him to have mercy on the daughter of this noble sage. And as Jews will always do in times of great need, they ran to the tzaddik, to what we would call today the Rebbe, who at that time was a Talmudic sage named Rabbi Hanina Mendoza, known as a miracle worker. At first, he calmly reassured them that everything would be fine. There was nothing to worry about. Trusting the promise of this righteous person, the tzaddik, they were calmed. A second hour passed, and the deadline for her rescue was ominously approaching with no salvation in sight. The earlier calm evaporated, and they again ran to Rabbi Hanina. But Rabbi Hanina maintained his earlier position. There's no cause for concern. When a third hour passed, and there was no longer any chance of finding the girl alive, their faith in the tzaddik's words once again wavered. Again, they ran to him in desperation. Don't worry, he told them. She's already emerged from the pit. Sure enough, news quickly spread that the girl had miraculously emerged, and it was indeed a miraculous recovery. The girl related that she'd been led out by an old man leading a ram, which would refer to Abraham with his ram. This is the Talmud saying. The community goes bananas. Jews run back to Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi, they excitedly exclaimed, "You're a prophet." Rabbi Chanina adamantly denied this. I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. I merely made a simple calculation. It cannot be that the thing with which this great person, Rabbi Nechunya, toils in the digging of wells to help other people, his mitzvah, should be the cause of suffering against his own children. It makes no sense. How could God do that? Therefore, I believed with absolute certainty that she would be saved. When 3 hours had passed, and it was no longer possible for her to survive in the pit, I believed with certainty that she had already emerged. Because how would God allow that? So just hold that for a second. You have a person, you have what we're going to call a Torah calculation, a great Torah scholar, Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakona. He says, when a person has devoted themselves to a certain mitzvah, a certain, in this case, a way of bringing benefit to the population through a certain lane, in this case, providing water, it makes no sense in Torah calculations, in what we understand of God, that should be the source of disaster, tragedy for that person. It doesn't make sense. So Rabbi Nechunya was absolutely certain. There's no way. And 3 hours have passed, she's out, because in nature it can't be as though nature makes such a difference here. In nature, it can't be left there. What does the Talmud continue? Despite all this, the Talmud mentions, the son of Rabbi Nechunya later ended up dying of thirst. How does that make any sense? How does it make any sense? This is the Talmud. The question is obvious. Following Rabbi Chanina's calculation, how is it possible that the boy died of thirst, a horrible death, when his father was single-mindedly preoccupied with providing drink for the visiting Jews? The question bothers many of the Talmudic commentators, who offer various answers. Here, Rabbi Wagner says, I would like to humbly suggest that there is indeed no answer. That is exactly what the Talmud is saying. Af al pi ken is a Hebrew expression, which means nonetheless. Even though A, B, and C lead up to a certain calculation, we have an equation, nonetheless, it doesn't always work out the way that makes sense to us. Even though it doesn't add up, that's the answer, the end. His son died. In other words, Rabbi Chanina made a correct calculation. It's impossible for the child of a righteous person to suffer in the area in which his or her father or mother toils for others. This reasoning was so conclusive that based on it, he was able to state with absolute certainty that the girl would be unharmed, and that yet the son of the same righteous person died of thirst. What's going on? How can that be? How is that possible? What happened to Rabbi Chanina's reasoning? The answer is we don't know. We don't know the answer. It doesn't fit with the earlier story. It doesn't fit with the flawless reasoning of Rabbi Chanina. It can't be. It's impossible. And the Talmud says it can't be. And Rabbi Chanina says it can't be. It's impossible. And still in all, af al pi ken in Hebrew, nonetheless, it happened. The questions are all there, but that's how it is. We got another lesson in the limitation of our intellect. We have calculations, logical ones, Torah-based ones we're certain about, that we have a license to be certain about it. We know certain things can happen. He writes as the Talmud. But af al pi ken, nonetheless, it happened. We cry out in unmanageable pain, in frustration, anger, shock, disbelief. But then we bow our heads in humility and we accept. We move forward. Because one of the basic foundations of our religion is the conviction that God is infinite. And it would be arrogant and foolish for us to even dream of understanding him. And from time to time, things continue to happen that don't make sense in our book. That don't even seem to make sense in his book. And nonetheless, they happen. We can only turn our tearful eyes heavenwards and ask, it happened, we accept it. Isn't it time to let us understand? Isn't it time for the era when Isaiah says, we will thank you for having been wrathful with us? That's a verse in the Torah. And I want to conclude with one piece he brings here. During the Spanish expulsion in 1492, it is told that there was an old sage, Chacham, who together with his fellow Jews was fleeing with his family. In the desert, his group was attacked by Arabs. His son-in-law was stabbed to death, and then his daughter was murdered in front of his eyes. He grabbed his infant grandson, all that was left of his family, his wife had passed away earlier, and half crazed from grief, fled alone into the desert. But the relentless desert sun got the better of him, and he fainted. When he came to, he saw to his shock that his grandson was no longer alive. In the meantime, he had died from thirst and the elements. Numb with grief, he dug a grave for his grandson. Then he turned his eyes heavenward and cried, "It is clear that there are forces above that are determined at all costs to alienate me from my God. I say to those dwelling on high, despite all your best efforts, I will remain a steadfast Jew." This idea is that things happen, and this Spanish sage was saying, I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. It's evil. But God, if you think this is going to make me doubt you, ain't gonna happen. I will persist in believing in you. I will persist in loving you, even if I don't understand. There's a stubbornness there. Now, we don't have that much time left, but I want to get a little bit back to at least some of what we were talking about in this week's Torah portion.
Is what you just read in the book?
Only a piece of it. Only a piece of it. You can Google it. So I'm going to go to okay, so here oh, 1 second. I'm sorry. I want to read inside together. This is the end of what we read yesterday. Then we'll go to this week's Torah portion. Let's look at 21. People are, as I mentioned before, people are confronting Jews, Hebrews are confronting Moses and Aaron. And they said to them, "May the Lord look upon you and judge. You have brought us into foul order in the eyes of Pharaoh. You come and you scream to Pharaoh, 'Let my people go.' You made it worse for us and in the eyes of his servants. You've given them a sword to kill us with." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why have you harmed this people? Why have you sent me? What's going on? You sent me to let them, to free them, to ease. You told me by the burning bush we're going to ease the pain of the Jewish people. And look what I did. I became your tool to make it worse. Since I have come to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has harmed this people and you have not saved your people. You haven't saved them. You didn't keep your word. And it's made it only worse." So again, this is a larger conversation, but this is split according to chapters of the Torah. The chapters in the Torah are not there from Jewish tradition. The chapters in the Torah were originally put in by the church. We have it split. The Torah is split, and I don't have time to show it. In the Torah, it's split into like paragraphs. We have 53 Torah portions, and then I don't know how many chapters, maybe 30, 40, or even 50 in a book, but there are 679 breaks in the Torah, like what's called a parsha. Well, in the hood, a Torah portion of the week we call it the parsha. In the Talmud, that's not the parsha. A parsha is a paragraph. So we have 53 parshas in the Torah. We actually have 679 parshas in the Torah. And the chapters, we work with them, but they're not ours. So this is what we just read is the end of chapter 5. Yesterday, the Torah reading ended with the first verse of chapter 6. It ends in the beginning of a chapter, just one verse, because we didn't come up with the chapters, but it is a different parsha. So the end of yesterday was, Lord, Moses has said, you have harmed your people. And the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a mighty hand he will send them out, and with a mighty hand he will drive them out of his land. So Moses, God answers Moses. Pull it. I will keep my word. Hang on. I'm getting there. Then this week's Torah portion starts with verse 2 of what we call chapter 6. And God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob with the name Almighty God, with my name Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. I did not become known to them. I established my covenant with them to bring them to the land of Canaan, the land of their sojourning, in which they sojourned. Also, I heard the moans of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians are holding in bondage, in which they sojourned. And also, I heard the moans of the people, the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians are holding in bondage, and remember my covenant. So therefore, say to the children of Israel, I'm here. I'm taking you out. This is going to be over. What's the flow? We don't have time to go into it, but Rashi looks at what is the flow here? And he has two options. One is that first he answered Moses. Moses said, well, you told me they're coming, they're getting out. I'm your bet to beat them more. I'm coming. You're going to see. Now, it's coming. And then God says to him something else. That since I promised Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah, since I promised earlier generations that they're going to go to the land of Israel and they're going to be a people, and I didn't keep my promise yet, now is when I keep my promise. Sit tight. Not his response to his question, saying it's kicking in. It's an old commitment I have, but this is what we're going. In other words, I made my commitment, and that's the two different names. The name of God in Yud, the Hey, and above the Hey is in the language of Talmud, and Rashi explains it here. We don't have the time for it. Is that's God, seeing God as being reliable for God's word. Because listen, God told us there's going to be Mashiach, and my mother passed away, and she kept saying that she was going to see Mashiach, and she didn't. She didn't get that appreciation of how God came through with the promise. And he's saying it's going to be a promise. Another angle, which we don't have time for it, but the Rebbe has and it's an involved Rashi. That's why I didn't get into it, because I think it would have been a little too complex for us. Another angle that Rashi brings here, he says, which is insinuated here, but not the normal way of reading the text. But as I've told you, Rashi wants to make it intelligible to a child. And he says a child would have a problem. Child would have a problem with what happened, what we read at the end of the Torah portion here. How does Moses come along and say, you sent me, you didn't do what you said, and it's only getting worse? The child raise their hand, and even a 5-year-old here will raise their hand and say, Abraham didn't do that. God told Abraham, you're going to have the land of Canaan, of Israel. And then when he wanted to bury his wife, he had to buy the property. Isaac was told he's going to have the land of Israel. And then when he tries to settle there, the Philistines are trying to kick him out, and they're fighting with him. It's not his. And what did Abraham and Sarah do? They didn't complain. They didn't say, hey, but God, didn't you tell me this is ours? They rolled with the punches. God knows what he's doing. Isaac rolled with the punches. Jacob and then his wives rolled with the punches. Why is Moses starting to talk back? Saying, oh, you said you're going to redeem them. You didn't redeem them. So from that perspective, the beginning of this week's Torah portion is actually a response to the question that we ended off last week with Moses saying, what are you doing? You're harming them. You didn't fulfill your word. And he's saying, I miss the earlier generation. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they trusted me. They trusted me. It took a little while to fulfill my couple 100 years, but they trusted me. They knew that I'm God, and if I make a commitment, it's going to be made. You're a little hasty for my taste. Moses is being rebuked. Again, it's not the idea that he's standing up for the suffering of the Jews, because Abraham stood up for the suffering of Sodom and Gomorrah. But it's the language of saying, you dealt evilly with them? Cool it, I'm God. These are my kids. I love them. I didn't come through for them yet. Slow. I just spoke to you at the burning bush. I said I'm going to redeem them. I am going to redeem them. You're going to see it. But I wish I saw more of your faith, that you trusted me. Asking for people, asking to relieve someone's pain is not the same as articulating something that can be read as a doubt in my desire to relieve the pain. And therefore, he gets a little bit of a rebuke here. So in the flow, he stood up for the Jewish people, like Abraham did. But there is also this important, more the spiritual element, and it's a midrashic lesson for us even for the 5-year-old to know that even when you're standing up to God for someone else's pain, never forget how Abraham and Sarah dealt with it. Abraham and Sarah accepted. They spoke up, but they never lost their faith that God loves, God is able, and that God will come through. So I'm going to leave it over there because it's a little late. It's a quite an involved discussion. But
How do we access this? You go back.
I will get
Who's in charge of it?
Debbie Marcus, but I will ask someone else asked me for it also because she couldn't be on, so I'll get it and I'll forward it. Okay.
Such a difficult topic.
It's a very difficult topic, and I'll say it again. I'll end with this. 1992, 93, we were doing when I was living in Spring Ridge, we had a lecture series. We brought out a few different speakers, and one of them was a speaker on theodicy. His name was Professor George Schlesinger from the University of North Carolina. He was a professor of philosophy, and I'm pretty sure he was observant Judaically. He definitely was very knowledgeable Judaically. And we had him for dinner before we rented the Liberty Corner Firehouse, and we had him for dinner in our condo before. And I was talking to him. I was in my early 20s, and he was, I think, in the 60s at the time. But he was someone, I think he was born in Israel. He definitely studied in Israel. And I was asking him about this theodicy because it was fascinating to me, and I was struggling with it, which I still am. And he said to me something which has proven pretty true to me. As we're sitting over Malki's steak, he says, here's how I see it. The answers that will make you feel good about God and suffering, in the final analysis, they actually don't make too much sense. The answers that make sense are not going to make you feel good. And I think that he's got a point. That's one of the reasons we want Mashiach, so that we can understand in a way that feels good. This is a festering sore on our psyche.
Before questioning God,
Yeah.
one should understand what God is, and I'm struggling with the concept of understanding what God is. I understand some of the things about God without beginning and forever.
Right. So to understand an infinite is by definition going to be an errand that we cannot complete.
Well, that's
But-
one of the facets, but the rest of it God is held. And why would God create this world which is totally flawed and then give it a lesson to improve? It just make a chaos. It makes no sense whatsoever.
And here it's the Torah lesson is that whether it makes sense to us or not, it may to us it could look like we're building sandcastles. If God says, when you do a mitzvah first and you help someone, or you put on tefillin, or you light Shabbos candles, I find it cosmically beautiful. That's what it goes.
But from outside, it looks like a failed chemistry experiment.
Fair enough. So, but we're still in the experiment. Hopefully today's when we see it succeed.
But God has this ultimate wisdom. He doesn't have to start with the failed experiment. He could start with perfection.
Starting with perfection would deprive us of the journey. The whole point of Torah is that we are given this journey, and there's a jigsaw puzzle, and instead of God giving it to us, put together, done, He says to us that I want you to go look at the pieces, figure out where they belong, piece them together. All right. Yes, doctor.
The problem that we have is we have two souls,
Yes.
you know, the holy and the animal soul.
Right.
The problem is we are too much focused on the animal soul.
Oh, that's a good. Well, yeah, that's well said. I mean, we want to try and think with a more visionary part of ourselves, but that's unfortunately that's also easy to say sometimes. But yeah, I agree with you.
This is the function, because the function of the human creation that create Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Adam, the perfect man, supposed to be, right? He lost it.
Yeah.
So you're going to get to the next step.
Yeah.
You have to forget about the animals. You go to the public aspect. When you get to the public aspect, that's when you get the culmination.
And that-
you're close to that.
And that's our daily struggle. Try and find the holy aspect and get above our own self-orientation.
It's going to come in group
Yeah.
together, or it's going to have individual experience.
Be well. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you.